In business today, three things to know. First, it's not quite Janet Yellen's midnight ride, but today she sounded the alarm. The sell-off is coming for overvalued tech stocks. What the Fed chair had to say about market valuations and whether that will impact Fed policy. Then, for BRICS members only, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa plan to create their own monetary fund and freeze out American influence. And what is Sync and how a penny stock with no clear business at all soared 25,000% in just a few weeks? Fraud or dumb luck? Arise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Meet Janet Yellen, would-be bubble killer. The chairwoman of the Federal Reserve told Congress Tuesday that overall the financial markets are in reasonable health, but warned that valuations of social media companies and some small-cap stocks are overblown. The market had a brief sell-off on the comments, but then kind of shrugged them off and recovered. We'll talk with Milton Ezrati in a moment about what all that means and what specifically she means. As for the economy, Yellen says the Fed will continue to help because more work has to be done. Here's what she had to say.
Since the February monetary policy report, further important progress has been made in restoring the economy to health and in strengthening the financial system. Yet too many Americans remain unemployed, inflation remains below our longer-run objective, and not all of the necessary financial reform initiatives have been completed.
Admit it, you hang on every word she has to say. There continues to be some up and down data for the economy. Retail sales stumbled in June with a less than expected increase. The Commerce Department said today that sales increased just 0.2%, a surprise decline in U.S. auto sales blamed. Stocks wavered for the day, finishing mixed. Here are the final numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average climbing up just 5.84 to 17,061. The S&P 500 backing off a little bit to 1970.33, and the Nasdaq down 2403 to 4416.39. Some of the stocks we are watching today. Hewlett-Packard's interim chairman of the board, Ralph Whitworth, will step down from the company's board of directors to focus on his health, the company says. Whitworth is credited with helping to turn the company around. Hewlett-Packard closing down a penny. Airbus dominating the first day of the Farnborough Air Show with $21 billion in sales, taking the lead over Boeing at the aviation industry's largest annual expo. Airbus closing down 63 cents. And Boeing closing at 129.10, down 42 cents. Taking a look at commodities, gold closing down, and oil pulling back below $100 a barrel. For more on the Yellen testimony, we're joined now by Milton Ezrati, senior economist and market strategist with Lord Abbott. Milton, did Janet Yellen say anything that surprised us today? She made some comments about the markets in particular, which maybe was a little bit surprising.
It was very surprising. I think it's the first time a Fed chairman has commented on equities since Greenspan used those famous or infamous words, irrational exuberance.
And what are we supposed to read into that? Because she was rather specific in talking about irrational exuberance, didn't use the words this time. She said social media company stocks.
And biotech. Remarkable. I didn't realize she was such a stock picker.
I was going to honestly ask you, is it really the Fed chair's job to tell us what we should be buying and selling?
No, it isn't. And frankly, when I first heard the comments, I was bewildered, or read them actually. I was bewildered. The only interpretation I can give, because she's not in the stock picking business, and at least as far as I know doesn't profess to be a stock picker, is that she's trying to tell the financial community, we know there are some bubbles, we know there is some overvaluation, it's not our job.
But, you know, she says about bubbles and there's an overvaluation. There's economists who say there's an entire asset bubble here that the Fed has created. And whether you believe that or not, is she trying to divert attention a little bit here?
Maybe. I really don't know. The Fed has created an asset bubble, mostly in bonds, treasuries, agencies, high-grade paper, and she even mentioned some junk as being overpriced, and she might be correct in that respect.
We're constantly told that the Fed's job is not to manage the stock market. And then she came out with these comments. And so they do manage the stock market, don't they?
Well, they watch the stock market. It's apparent. They do valuations. It's apparent. And who would have known? Because I didn't know the Fed did valuations. But I can't believe she was telling people what to do about the stock market. And I certainly am confident that the Fed is not taking this into consideration. The only interpretation I can put on this is she's saying we're aware that this can happen.
It's an interesting point.
But we are not going to be. We're worried about employment. We're worried about inflation. We're worried about our
And maybe
issues.
she's trying to telegraph then that we know that valuations are playing a role in some of the decisions we're making, and just be careful.
Well, yes, that the decisions we're making will affect valuations.
I wonder who she's speaking to, honestly, because retail investors aren't really going to listen to what she has to say. I mean, you know, they're not following Janet Yellen's words. So who is she speaking to there?
That I'm confident. She's speaking to the traders. And she's saying to them, don't look to us to help you. Don't look to us to harm you. We have a different objective.
These are active traders, not investors that she's speaking to.
No, active traders, professional traders.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the economy. She says there is more work to be done, that employment is not at the levels they want. And she did single out inflation, that the inflation numbers are not where they want. They're kind of looking for 2% inflation, from what I understand. Is that about the right target?
Yes, that's the target the Fed informally have chosen. Officially, they don't have a target, but the 2% is the number.
They also don't have a target anymore on unemployment, do they? They sort of took that number off the table.
They took that number off, and they're not being very forthcoming as to exactly where the number is. For that, I'm glad. I don't want people betting on that. For that, I'm glad. She did two things, though. On the one hand, she put a kind of a rosy glow on the economy to the senators in the hearing room by saying things were pretty good. And then she said, but not good enough. And she soft-pedaled some of the weak spots in the economy.
A lot of people looking at the possibility of interest rates, and we're getting sort of mixed news. There are some who think interest rates, that the Fed will have to raise rates before the end of this year. There are those who are sticking to their guns, saying it's not going to happen until 2015. Do you have a point of view?
I'm taking Janet at her word. She said not till 2015. The hawks and the Fed, to use a silly expression, are still on their perch.
Okay, and so she hasn't been getting the pressure yet from the hawks to do something.
She gets pressure.
But there are commentators out there who says the Fed is really in danger of missing the inflation boat here, and that it'll be too late.
Well, some of the Fed people are, president of the Philly Fed, Plosser, has said the Fed's always behind in this game. We have to be more proactive. He hasn't yet got to the point where he's saying raise rates now, but he is one of these hawks. She said to Congress today, if I can read between the lines, you're not influencing me yet.
Okay, Milton Ezrati, thank you so much for your help today.
Thank you.
Coming up, the BRICS may dump the IMF, why emerging markets may start their own bank. You're watching Arise Exchange.
Looking at mainstream news stations where only you have a very small minority of people of color being newscasters and actually having prominent roles in the media.
In a newsroom in the United States, maybe 10% of decision makers come from communities of diversity. That's not right.
Well, diversity is important because the more complete the news is, the more accurate a picture you're getting of the world, and the more you can form an accurate opinion of things.
The vision here is not just to tell the main stories of the day, but to tell the news that other organizations don't tell, and tell it in a way that people like me, people that look like me, that look like you, are interested in.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News. Arise News, every culture, every angle.
From pitch to politics, Brazil now moves on from hosting the World Cup to hosting the 6th BRICS Summit, welcoming leaders from Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Top of the agenda, creating 2 financial institutions designed to compete with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Arise News Washington Bureau Chief James Blue is in the nation's capital with more. James, from what I understand, Brazil's president really needs a win here, doesn't she? She had a very rough World Cup, and there's been some talk that she could face some political pressure. So what is she hoping to get out of this?
Well, she's hoping to get both a reserve fund, which would be funded at about $100 billion, and a development bank, which would be funded at about $50 billion. The reality is that these countries are tired of dealing with the World Bank and the IMF because there are lots of restrictions on governance, on transparency, and they would just like to sort of get money and do these development projects without the strings required by the Washington institutions. And the hope is that by creating these two, the bank and the reserve fund, that they will have money to do what they want to do to develop their countries.
Yeah, and they don't want to be told what to do, basically. They want to go it alone. The question is, do they have the resources and the ability, do you think, to put these banks together?
They certainly have the resources to put the development bank together. Whether they have the resources to create the reserve fund really remains to be seen. If you look at the economy of South Africa, Russia is having trouble with Ukraine. There are a lot of sort of internal pressures which I think will make it much less likely that they will be able to fund the reserve fund to the $100 billion level that they like. They want to get the bank off the ground because they also want to use the bank to provide loans to other parts of the world, which will give them increasing influence. So my sense is that the actual bank has a much better chance of getting off the ground. And that's what people have said that we've spoken to.
Do you think that the World Bank and the IMF, well, they know what's going on, obviously. Is there some competition here? Do you think that they may go back to these countries and say, well, wait a minute, we can maybe change some of our rules?
I don't think you're going to see any rule changes from the World Bank or the IMF. They are very happy to sort of have less a burden in terms of handing money out to countries that need development. There's an African Development Bank, there's an Asian Development Bank, and so all of these additional institutions just support development around the world, and in some ways you can understand take pressure off these two institutions here in D.C. So I think they are actually quite happy to take some of the pressure off.
Do you expect that the leaders of these nations are also going to be talking about trade and maybe creating a freer trade zone between the group?
Well, initially, that's what the thought was based on last year's meeting. However, some of the efforts that have happened since then, South Africa is in a real mess economically. The economy is shrinking. And there have been a lot of protectionist efforts sort of within some of the countries in this group. So it's really not quite sure whether they are going to push for freer trade because they're all trying to figure out how to get their goods to the international market in as protected a way as possible.
And finally, everybody wants to be part of a group of letters, if you will. And there's a new one called MINT: Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. That's now going to compete with BRICS. They're growing faster.
They are growing faster, and there's sort of more opportunity in these sort of MINT countries. Nigeria has overtaken South Africa as the largest economy on the African continent. Turkey is still booming. And, there's a real sense that there are lots of opportunities. And whereas the BRICS were at one time the leading emerging markets, that distinction has moved to other countries at this point.
Okay, James Blue in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lots of earnings to report today. Goldman Sachs blowing past expectations. Goldman reported quarterly revenue of $9.13 billion. That's 14% above estimates. The firm said its success was due to a diverse portfolio that led the world in mergers and acquisitions in the last year. JP Morgan Chase also beating expectations in its second quarter. In spite of paying some very hefty legal fees, JPM netting nearly $24 billion this quarter, about 6% higher than expectations. CEO Jamie Dimon contributed the strong numbers to record business loans and card sales in its consumer banking arm. Outside the banking industry, Johnson & Johnson reporting strong sales. The healthcare company's second quarter revenue totaled $19.5 billion, a 9% increase year over year. The boosted profits came from growth in domestic sales driven primarily by hepatitis, cancer, and type 2 diabetes treatment drugs. Intel reporting it beat expectations just slightly this quarter. Intel saying it brought in nearly $14 billion. That topped expectations by 0.6%. Intel credited this quarter's revenue to growing desktop and tablet sales. And Yahoo announcing disappointing numbers for its second quarter, reporting earnings of $1.04 billion, which was around 4% below already flat expectations from analysts. CEO Marissa Mayer said she was disappointed at the numbers, which many see as an indicator for Alibaba's much-anticipated IPO. Massive job cuts are reportedly coming from Microsoft employees. The software maker is expected to lay off thousands in order to meet new chief executive Satya Nadella's productivity goals, and it could be the biggest in Microsoft's history. But first, before we get to that story, we're going to talk about the trading frenzy of Sync Technology shares, which saw the penny stock surge 25,000%. Sync is connected to a social network site called IntroBiz, but honestly, it has no clear business, nor any clear assets, nor any employees. It's a good business to be in. Open Forum editor-at-large Rod Kurtz joins us now on this mysterious
Not a bad return,
company.
Right?
That's a great return. And, if you don't have to pay any employees and you don't have to make any products and you don't have to do anything,
that is a business model right there,
we could all get behind.
Yeah, this is, I've been doing this a long time. You have as well. I thought I had seen it all. I mean, this is just crazy. Even just the name of the company is a little ridiculous. But certainly, you see a rate of return like that, it's going to raise some red flags. And you saw the regulators essentially stop the trading of the stock, which doesn't even trade on an exchange. And
yeah,
I think
it's an over-the-counter penny stock.
Yeah, and we're just starting to learn, who's behind it. You've got the founder who's saying, I'm not involved. And, I was reading some reports today about this, and basically the consensus out there is, is this a Wolf of Wall Street pump and dump kind of thing? And the reality is a lot of people out there say, if it was, this was not a very, very effective one, because you don't want to set off those red flags and see a stock surge quite so much. So
what do we know about the background? We know the following. It's a Nevada-based company, and Nevada companies are notoriously suspect. Sorry, Nevada, but when you don't have any securities laws, this is what happens.
Or many other laws.
It was a penny stock, meaning they did a reverse merger into another company to go public, which is a way of going public and is totally legitimate. But beyond that, we don't know anything about what they do.
Yeah, and I think, the fact that this happened is now, an excuse to start probing and seeing, and we're going to continue, I think, in the days to come to understand what this is all about. As someone who works with largely privately held companies, a lot of them, think about going public, and I sort of caution, the markets can be tricky and this and that. There's a lot of manipulation. I think the lesson we can draw at this point already is that, as online trading becomes more and more trading in general, we're not on the floor of the exchange anymore, there is room for manipulation, there is room for risk, and I think we want to learn the lessons from it.
I will also say this, and if you saw The Wolf of Wall Street, you understand this kind of boiler room activity where people get on the phone and do this high-pressure sales. They don't exist, I understand, anymore. And the fact is, you as a trader should have enough information online to make a reasonable decision here, which leads me to believe that a lot of people who went and simply, trend is your friend, and went up on it and don't care anything about whether the company is.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, when it comes to investing, whether it's individual stocks or companies, I sort of fall back on the Buffett rule. He likes to invest in companies he understands.
Yeah, and this one you can understand.
Yeah, with no revenue, no assets, and no employees, what exactly are you investing in? It could be a quick buck if you somehow manage to time this.
And most people get in at the top and watch everything collapse. All right. Let's talk a little bit about Microsoft now. This is a company going under major transitions. There's a story this weekend in the New York Times about how the new CEO is really abandoning the Steve Ballmer, the old CEO's path, and refocusing the company on enterprise products.
I think that makes sense. I mean, if you stop and think about it, this isn't the end of Microsoft. I think Microsoft is, here to stay for a long time. They power most of the computers on the planet.
They generate a tremendous amount of cash. And look, you can beat up Microsoft all you want, but it's a cash machine.
Yeah, and keep in mind, this company was founded in 1975. That's an eternity in the tech world where we're seeing companies come and go, year in and year out. So it's obviously got a very strong foothold. It does have successful products like Xbox. They're trying mobile now once again. And I think, again, the fact that they power most of the computers on the planet is a benefit. The CEO in his memo to the staff said organizations will change. And this is, I think, just a natural evolution.
Do you think the layoffs are coming because the company simply got too bureaucratic and ballooned too big? Or do they need to make the layoffs to appease Wall Street?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, you think about a company of that size that has been around for so long, it's sort of layer on top of layer on top of layer. And the benefits they have is they can try a lot of different things, but sometimes they don't work and you have to scale it back. So, I think the headline is somewhat dramatic, biggest cuts in Microsoft history. It's not going anywhere.
What's your report card on the new CEO so far?
So far, so good. I mean, this move is bound to turn some heads. We're talking about it for a reason. But I think that when you have a new CEO, especially after someone like Ballmer, who was, strong personality, had been there a long time, you do have to change course a little bit, both for the optics and for the operation itself.
And do you think that overall Microsoft's strategy should then be back to software, back to enterprise, back to business?
I mean, enterprise, I work in the category in some respects. It's growing by leaps and bounds. You know, you're talking about small and mid-sized businesses, sort of large corporations as well. I do think it's good to sort of double down on your secret sauce and you know, what you've been good at rather than having, you know, 50 different things.
They should probably not become the next Google, which was a little bit of what Steve Ballmer was going at.
You know, my sense of Microsoft, where it currently is and where it's probably going, is a little bit like the phone company. It's sort of there. You don't think about it. It powers your.
For the longest time, it was great to be the phone company, but it's not great to be the phone company anymore.
You got to adapt.
Rob, thank you so much.
Good to see you.
Okay. Ahead, if you saw a swastika flying over the beach this weekend, we'll introduce you to the man behind it as our favorite person of the day. You're watching Arise Exchange. Because we live in a global, interconnected world, business news no longer stops when the markets close on Wall Street. And what we've discovered over the past few years of the financial crisis is that events and news that happen even in the smallest countries impact the United States and the world at large. As we bring together experts and analysts and thought leaders and CEOs and companies across many industries to not only provide the macroeconomic view, but news everyday people can use.
Arise News is a different kind of network. We are able to tell our own stories, and we're able to cover stories in a way that other media outlets don't do. We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well. Arise News is a place where we can tell stories in an interesting, factual, inclusive way like no one else in the business can.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention and not for the right reasons. There are some things in life that deserve rehabilitation, but most probably don't think the Nazi swastika is one of them. Unless you're a French guy named Claude Vauvial, who goes by the name Rael. He founded the Raelian movement, of course, which has taken up the cause of bringing back the good name of the swastika. You see, the group believes the Nazis took the symbol and then ruined it for everyone. This past weekend, the Raelian movement hired a plane to tow this banner over Coney Island, New York. You can imagine the shock of beachgoers who saw a swastika with a Star of David flying overhead. What the Nazis couldn't accomplish over the beaches of America in World War II, our friend Rael accomplished on just one summer day. The group is so serious, apparently, that it even named this Swastika Rehabilitation Week. Because you need a whole week to convince the world that the swastika is actually a symbol of peace and has nothing to do with those bad Nazis who murdered millions of people. Now, the Raelian movement has interests beyond the swastika, thankfully. It believes that alien scientists came to Earth and created all life here. Raelians were founded in 1973 by the aforementioned Claude Vauvial, who is also a lounge singer, street musician, and professional race car driver. He claims to have raced in some of the world's premier competitions. And to boot, Raelians are also nudists. And so, for being a nudist, musician, race car driver, and swastika-loving Frenchman, Claude Vauvial is our favorite person of the day. Coming up next, the author of How the Poor Can Save Capitalism is back on the programs created to do just that. You're watching Arise Exchange.
If I was building my own news network, first thing I think I'd want high-quality reporters, very educated, intelligent people.
Hello, I'm Francesca Maxime.
I'm Julian Phillips.
I'm Wendy Gillette.
I'm Sophia Songhai.
I'm Gary Anthony Ramsey. Thank you for joining us here in New York City.
I would like to see more people of color represented in high positions in media.
We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well.
People need to understand the problems that are going on in the community are much closer than we actually think they are.
Kayla Phillips is one of the shoppers who is suing Barney's, and she is here with her attorney. What is it that you want from them?
Not to judge every African-American person that comes in your store.
It's no secret that the income disparity between rich and poor Americans is getting wider. Economists say lack of education and job skills are at the root of the problem. Our next guest has been at the forefront of bridging the gap between the rich and the poor. John Hope Bryant is the founder of Operation Hope, whose mission is to strengthen the economy by empowering those with limited income. And he joins us back here on Arise Exchange to talk about it. Thank you for coming in. Your book is How the Poor is Saving Capitalism. And I want to ask you a little bit again about why you say that.
Well, in some ways, they already are and getting no credit for it. So half of Americans make $50,000 a year or less. They take 80 to 90% of every dollar and put it back in the economy because they can't afford not to. My wealthy friends take less than 50 cents of every dollar and put it back in the economy.
They save money. And we talk about raising taxes on them. You can't raise taxes on the rich enough to cover all the social programs we need.
Correct. And they're just immune. They're just like allergic to spending money for a lot of reasons. But the average everyday person can't afford not to spend money because they're living from paycheck to paycheck. So 70% of our economy is driven by consumer spending in the country, in the U.S. It's most developed countries, by the way. That's right. And 70% of Americans are living from paycheck to paycheck. So this now puts the working poor, the struggling class, and the teetering middle class in the same bucket. So the color now is not white, black, red, brown, or yellow. It's green, as in U.S. currency. We got to stop these sort of border fights, no pun intended, around race. You deal with class, you get race for free. So we got to start dealing with the issues of class and poverty, not race and the color line. That's an old story. It has been around since the time of Jesus. It will not go away, but it is not the primary story. The primary story is economic prosperity. That's a story in Africa. That's a story in Asia. That's a story in Latin America. What Africa needs is a generation of taxpayers. I mean, it is the same story with a different
generation of taxpayers, entrepreneurs, the tools to give them that. So Operation Hope, describe to me the mission and who you're targeting it to.
Yeah, so I think that the people who can save capitalism and drive Africa and developing countries' growth are the same people who created in many ways, capitalism. Sounds like an oddity, but it was immigrants to this country. Every big business was once a small one. You know, UPS was a guy with $100 and a bicycle. FedEx was a guy named Fred Smith with an idea. Coca-Cola was 3 guys in a pharmacy. You know, this wasn't a poor guy, but it was a guy with a vision. Well, at one point, he was actually not doing very well. So every big business was once a small one. So I think that what we can do here in America to get us back on track is to create 1 million startup businesses a year, to cut to the chase. That's going to be people who have the capacity, the time, the risk profile to start small businesses. First, to start with those who can't get a job. So let's go create one, like the guy who made the suit I'm wearing. He wanted to be a fashion designer, didn't know anybody in a fashion house. We put him in business.
You know, it's really interesting you say that because you look at entrepreneurs and you think that they're they have to be self-driven, meaning they have to overcome so many obstacles. So, but we need to tell people, don't we, that anyone out there can be an entrepreneur if we give them the tools to do that.
I'll go one step further. Even if you don't want to be an entrepreneur, you need an entrepreneurial mindset. Because if you're running a household with too much month at the end of your money, you need an entrepreneurial mindset. Which bill am I going to pay? What priorities are going to use? How do I get a daycare? How do I take care? You know, you got to prioritize your life. You need to have a can-do, get it done, around it, through it, to it mentality. What you're for, not what you're against. We need an entire country with an entrepreneurial mindset. And then we need to find those 1 in 100,000 Bill Gates and Steve Jobs in the schools.
So where does this start? Let me ask you, where does this start? Does this start from the communication from the White House down or from the ground roots?
Look, I've been an advisor for the last 5 U.S. presidents. I'm sorry, I've been honored by the last 5, I've been an advisor for the last 3. God bless them. I think that is the toughest job on the planet. They can focus on 5 things at a time. Okay? I'm not waiting for them to focus on this one. I'm an advisor to Obama. But I mean, that's just not, to me, waiting for somebody else to acknowledge that I'm important once a year is not, to me, good policy for my life. So the question is not what can the PhDs do, but what can the PhDs do? And every president has responded to people. Okay, the President President Johnson responded to Dr. King. We got to go out and create the movement. I mean, you and me and everybody else. And by the way, media has an enormous role to play in this.
Absolutely, we need to be able to tell these stories.
Yeah, so I'm not waiting for anybody. Dr. King had 70 employees. 70. And he changed the world. No, went up against the largest military, did without firing a shot. Lincoln, in 1865, President Lincoln, show you this is bipartisan, after Emancipation Proclamation was signed, created the Freedmen's Bureau Act, created the Freedmen's Bank. Freedmen's Bank's mission was to teach free slaves about money. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to finish what he started. We're going to create 1,000 Hope Inside locations, inside of bank branches, credit unions, grocery stores. We're going to raise credit scores to 700.
And you're going to go to the people, you're going to reach the people where they are, really, which is part of the gap that we haven't been able to do.
Correct. If you go into a check cashing neighborhood, there's a 500 credit score neighborhood. Okay, it's got a low tax base, it's got low engagement. If I raise a credit score to 700, you create an emerging market, and that's what we're going to do, community by community.
Okay, John Hope Bryant, thank you again. Always terrific talking.
Thank you very much.
That's Arise Exchange. I'm Andrew Schmertz. We'll see you tomorrow.